Board of the Puget Sound Regional Council to order. Roll call is by sign-in sheet, so it should be going around. Make sure you sign in on the sheet. We are expecting a couple of members to participate by phone today, and the folks I have, if you please let me know you're here. I have Mayor Dennis Law.
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Councilmember Douglas Richardson.
Here.
Councilmember Stephanie Wright. Stephanie? Okay. Anybody else on the phone that I've missed?
Yeah, this is Dick Morzano, Port of Tacoma.
Okay. All right. And I want to welcome some new alternates to today's board meeting, executive board meeting. We have King County Councilmember Joe McDermott. There's Joe. Morning, welcome. Lakewood Councilmember Paul Bocci, representing other cities and towns in Pierce County. Did I get that right?
That's the correct name, correct.
Okay. Port of Seattle Commissioner Peter Steinberg. Have I seen Peter? No, Peter. Okay. And any other new members or alternates that I've missed? Okay. So just for the benefit of folks watching online and also on the phone, let's just go around the room and introduce ourselves. Becky, do you want to start?
Becky Erickson, Mayor of the City of Paulsbo, representing Kitsap Other Cities.
Claudia Balducci, representing King County.
Roger Millar, WashDOT.
Rick O'Brien, City of Seattle.
Cassie Franklin, Mayor of Everett.
Barb Tolbert, City of Arlington, representing other cities and towns in Snohomish County.
Chris Roberts, Councilmember, City of Shoreline, representing Sound Cities Association.
When we get to him, we'll bring a mic to him.
Amy Okerlander, Mayor, City of Duval, representing Sound Cities Association.
David Baker, Mayor, City of Kenmore, representing Sound Cities Association.
Joe McDermott, representing King County.
Rob Johnson, City of Seattle.
Hester Sarabrin, Washington State Transportation Commission.
Dana Ralph, Mayor of Kent.
Josh Brown, PSRC Executive Director.
Jay Arnold, Deputy Mayor in Kirkland.
Bruce Bassett, Councilmember Mercer Island, representing Sound Cities Association, alternate.
Amy Wallen, Mayor of Kirkland.
Christy Malchow, Mayor of Sammamish, representing Sound Cities Association.
Catherine Stanford, Deputy Mayor, City of Lake Forest Park, representing Sound Cities Association.
John Chelmanack, Mayor of Bellevue.
Victoria Woodards, Mayor of Tacoma.
Rick Talbert, Pierce County Council Member.
Kathy Lambert, King County Council.
Greg Wheeler, Mayor of Bremerton.
Charlotte Garrido, Kitsap County.
Terry Ryan, Snohomish County.
Ron Lucas, Town of Stillicum, other cities and towns, Pierce County.
Diana Lauterbach, PSRC.
Sheila Rogers, PSRC staff.
And Dave Summers, did you get? Nope. We'll get you settled here, Bruce.
Yeah, you think I would have figured this out by now.
Now we'll try. Bruce Dameyer, Pierce County.
There we go. And Dave Summers, Snohomish County is it. So we'll go to public comment, and we have several folks signed up. I'll just remind you, each member of the public that wants to give comment will have 2 minutes. We discourage people from using obscenities and personal attacks, so please be mindful of that as you're giving public comment today. And the first is Alex Zimmerman.
Heil, my dirty double-A Führer, a Nazi social democratic mafia with progressive Gestapo principle. My name Alex Zimmerman, and I'm president of Stand Up America. Guys, we need to stop acting in choice people who acting like a freaking idiot. It's exactly what has happened now. We need to elect people like Donald Trump or Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan, and probably people who are interested in move America back to normal life, like me and other people. What has happened right now is absolutely critical because idiots have idiotical power and nobody's stopping this. And I give you classic example. Campaign, what is we have right now for harassment or sexual harassment, is more dangerous than Gestapo, KGB in McCarthyism in 54. Why? Because this a political power what is have 19th century in this 20th century in this understandable. But in 21st century in America, in city like Seattle, for example, or King Country, or another county, you know what it means, acting with sexual harassment is can come only in regular harassment too. Is come only from idiot. Is give power to idiot more and more and more. We need to stop this. Why? Because idiot more dangerous for the system than economica, politica, or culture. This idiotic situation can change everything as is happen now. When we not stopping this idiot who in this chamber, many, when we don't stop on this, we cannot change. We need change. Everybody understands this right now. Look, I come to Seattle meeting, people angry, 95%. So right now I speak to everybody, stand up America, stand up Washingtonian. We need stop an idiot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Paul Locke.
Paul Locke. I don't believe that we can continue the way we're doing. We're spending money we don't have. I understand they've increased the federal budget by billions of dollars. They're raising our taxes for the investor class to keep these projects going. We set up our own retirement system to take care of ourselves. And they're trying to siphon off. They charge us at higher rates of taxes than other people. It has gone as high as 45% for us investor class. All these programs and that run by government, we pay directly to the people for Medicare and all the other things that we want. At less than the co-payment for the people who are using the federal system. You've got to look at how we are spending money. The future generations is going to end up with a bill. We're going to be like Italy was at the end of the Second World War. They had nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Will Knedlick.
My name is Will Knedlick. I'm President-elect of the Washington State Good Roads and Transportation Association, now in our 120th year of promoting multimodal transportation, but I'm speaking today as an individual. I'm here neither to rail against you nor as a member of the investor class. Indeed, I am Mr. Locke's chauffeur. But I am here to ask you to do something that's essential, and that is, the chair of your Transportation Policy Board stated 2 weeks ago today in this room, quote, "We'll do our victory lap discussion at our next meeting," end quote. I'd like to ask you to put a stop to that. And I've had distributed around to you the two areas in which your plans are clearly violating state law, and ask you to, rather than taking a victory lap, to bring it into compliance. First of all, for over 24 years now, you have defied the least cost planning methodology obligations specifically assigned to this body. Furthermore, you've disregarded the administrative code for this SEPA, which requires that significant impacts shall include the cost of and effects on public services such as utilities, roads, fire, and police protection. As a result, you have contributed substantially to the degradation of our road system, which our chief state engineer has stated clearly at our last Good Roads Association meeting last year, are crumbling under our feet now. Additionally, rather than in fact doing planning, you merely staple Sound Transit's plan to your plan, and that is in clear violation of the law. As you will see, Sound Transit has a plan that you've endorsed that would start building light rail for Seattle and for a second and third line for Seattle before it gets light rail to either Pierce County or Snohomish County, both of which have a contractual right that they obtain by virtue of giving you the authority, the Sound Transit, the authority to go to the taxpayers, and you need to stop simply embracing the violation of law by Sound Transit. And I think the chair and vice chair of this organization are in a position, along with Mr. Lucas, to see that the ordinance that granted Sound Transit the authority to go to the taxpayers is complied with as in terms of the contractual right of Tacoma to have light rail to Tacoma, and for Snohomish County to have light rail north of Alderwood.
Thank you. Okay, we need a second to restart, believe the cameras. Technical difficulty. There we go. Okay. Welcome all. We've got a pretty full agenda today, including action on the regional centers framework and an update. We're scheduled to make a recommendation also on the supplemental budget and work program for the General Assembly to act on in May. And we'll also hear about the comments we received on the draft regional transportation plan, not to be confused with the comment period that ended on Monday for the Vision 2050 scoping process. In preparation for the General Assembly, I've appointed the nominating committee, which will propose candidates for the positions of PSRC President and Vice President. Mayor John Marchione from the City of Redmond and immediate past President will serve as the chair, and I've asked the following people to serve on the committee: Councilmember Claudia Balducci from King County, Councilmember Doug Richardson from Pierce County, Mayor Becky Erickson from the City of Paulsbo, Commissioner Charlotte Garrido from Kitsap County, Mayor Victoria Woodards from the City of Tacoma, Commissioner Dick Marzano from Port of Tacoma, Councilmember Terry Ryan from Snohomish County, and Mayor Cassie Franklin from the City of Everett. So that will be our nominating committee. So, yes, Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick technicality. Since we rebooted the system, you will notice the light next to your card is probably flashing. You need to pull your card out and reinsert it, and it should become solid, and then you're back reset. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. So now you're the expert.
I'm sitting next to the expert.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. All right. I'm going to turn it. We've got a full agenda, so I'm going to turn it over to Josh for the director's report.
Excellent. Thank you, Executive Dan Meyer, for keeping us on track here. I have a few items I just want to quickly run through for the Executive Board. First, a couple items that are in your agenda packet and a couple items that are on the consent agenda. First up, item 6C on the consent agenda is approval of membership for the City of Des Moines to rejoin the Puget Sound Regional Council. We're thrilled to have the city back. I've had the opportunity to meet with the mayor and city staff. We look forward to a strong collaborative partnership with them. We had a great conversation at the Operations Committee meeting on how we can reach out to some of our other members who are quite small communities within the four-county region to get there. Right now, we only have 6 other jurisdictions that aren't members, many small cities and towns, but welcome to the city. Item 6F, so for new and returning board members, one of the really important roles that we serve as a metropolitan planning organization for the region is updating and keeping current the region's transportation improvement program, our TIP. We have project selection authority over federal funds such as our federal highways and FTA funds that come through our organization. There's also, though, a number of projects that are funded either with state or local dollars where we don't have project selection authority, but we have the responsibility to keep current on the Transportation Improvement Program. We bring to you large projects in scope, but one of the things I wanted to highlight this month was just a number of great projects that are happening in the region. First, there are two sponsors that have several projects that are coming forward from Kitsap Transit. There's $10.4 million to construct the Whedon Way Transit Center in East Bremerton, $9.1 million to bring online the Southworth to Seattle Fast Ferry connection. That includes terminal work and construction of one new boat, $19.3 million for the Kingston to Seattle passenger-only ferry connection. That constructs two boats and makes investments in the terminal there, and then an additional $12 million to make some enhancements for the Bremerton connection to downtown Seattle, building two more boats and terminal work. Also included are two projects on I-5. You can think of the portion of I-5 that's right under the convention center, where there's immediate mobility investments from two of these projects in our busiest corridor in our region that total about $18 million. The entire Transportation Improvement Program includes 611 projects that represent $37 billion of investments that are coming online. Over the next 4 years, $11.8 billion of investments coming online of projects of all type throughout our region. So again, really demonstrating the forward momentum that we have as a region, trying to meet the needs of the region and trying to deal with, one of the biggest challenges that's in the minds of folks that live here. Information item 10, that is an update on where we're at with our regional aviation baseline study. As we discussed and following the direction from all of you at our February meeting, we released an RFQ on March 1st. We'll receive consulted responses by March 30th, and we're continuing to work with the FAA to secure funding for the regional aviation baseline study. Also included in information item 10 are a pair of resolutions from the city of Burien and Des Moines that request PSRC and other partners to step forward with that next iteration of planning to be able to get ready for the future and prepare for the region's long-term aviation capacity needs. Both of the resolutions have a sense of urgency. I've met with both cities, their mayors, and their staff, and I think our regional aviation baseline study is absolutely consistent with those resolutions and the requests from those cities. Just wanted you to be aware of those communications. Finally, as Executive Summers noted, our comment period for Vision 2050 scoping closed on Monday, March 19th. We've heard from a slew of organizations, agencies, jurisdictions, individuals. In total, when we combine all the comments from both the letters and the feedback that have been submitted to us, along with our outreach meetings, staff is recording about 1,000 individual comments so far to inform our SEPA and plan scoping. So it's been a big success. And just finally wrapping up, knowing that we're a little behind on time, I want to thank the mayors of Sammamish, Duval, and Kenmore for meeting with me recently between our last executive board meeting. Now, of course, one of the charges that you have for me is making sure that I'm staying in contact with our membership, and of course we have some great new members of our executive board. I enjoyed all of our meetings, so thanks for your time, and I look forward to a strong partnership in 2018 and beyond. With that, Executive Summers, I'm happy to take any questions from the board, or we can just move on.
Thank you, Josh. Any questions? All right. So we'll move on to committee reports. Please look in your agenda packets for the reports from the Policy Board and Economic Development District Board meetings. And the Operations Committee did meet this morning, and I'd like to call on Executive Dan Meyer, Chair of the committee, to give us a report from the Operations Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. At today's Operations Committee meeting today, we recommended approval of vouchers. That's item 6B on the Executive Board's agenda. The committee also recommends approval of the Supplemental Biennial Budget and Work Program by the Executive Board and adoption by the General Assembly on May 31st. The committee also, as was indicated by Josh, had a kind of a discussion about, recommends approval of Des Moines being added back to the council, and did have a very robust discussion about how we can engage the few smaller cities that are and towns that are not currently with us, and the fact that getting their voice at the table will both benefit us and benefit them as we go forward. So there was a lot of good discussion by Councilmember Lambert and Councilmember Talbert about how the counties might be able to help facilitate some of that transaction. We also authorized the executive, approved the contract authority for the second year of the household travel survey program, and to allow Josh to go ahead and plan and contract for our General Assembly in the 2018 General Assembly. We did not really get as much time to review our monthly statements. I have to tell you, the Operations Committee is very active and engaged, so we get a lot of talking done in 20 minutes, a lot less reviewing of monthly standards. We have to do that now outside of the meeting. So with that, I'll entertain any questions.
Questions? Any questions? Okay. Is this working? Yeah, you're on. There we go. Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Would anyone like anything removed for discussion? All right, is there a motion on the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion at all? Pardon? Oh, and we do have a quorum. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, consent agenda is adopted. New business, Regional Centers Framework Update. And call on Liz Underwood Boltman and Paul Ingram to give us a report.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. And I'll just get things started while Liz pulls up the presentation. So we presented to you at your last meeting the Growth Management Policy Board's recommendation, and as Mayor Wheeler expressed last time about how the Growth Board spent over a year working through a lot of details, discussing a lot of different options, working through some variety of different potential amendments and to bring this recommendation to you today. And today we can do a little recap. I know some of you weren't able to attend that meeting, so we're happy to answer any questions that you have about the Growth Board's recommendation. And then, of course, in your packet, or I should say by email, and we have available a March 21st version of some amendments that have been processed over the last week that people have proposed. So I want to make sure you have that. If you don't have that copy, I'll be glad to get a copy for you right now, and I'll turn it over to Liz to provide you the background on the framework.
Yes, good morning. So we have a number of amendments to talk about at this meeting. So I'm going to give just a very brief presentation on what the project has looked like overall, and then we're going to go through the amendments on version 3, the March 21st version. So this project was really born of member interest in looking at the overall center's framework to ensure some consistency between the framework and also just to do a major sort of refresh of the work that we've done to date. So the board adopted a scope of work back in 2015 to recommend structural changes to recognize both regional and sub-regional centers using consistent designation criteria and procedures. So that's what we've been working with for the last 3 years to develop a recommendation for the executive board. So this has been a long-term project that has involved a significant amount of board, committee, and outreach meetings, as well as workshops and working sessions among the board. We convened 2 separate committees, including most notably the Stakeholder Working Group, and developed a significant amount of background material. So at the February 1st meeting of the Growth Management Policy Board, they recommended the framework to the Executive Board, just with 1 dissenting vote, and adopted several amendments at that meeting. So the version of the framework that we're working with is the February 2nd version of the framework. The GMPB recommendation basically encourages larger centers to plan for more growth. It creates a new path for designating manufacturing industrial centers. It also provides an approach to redesignate our existing regional centers so that everyone's sort of working with the same set of expectations into the future. That it recognizes major military installations, increases planning and performance expectations for all centers, and creates minimum guidelines to designate countywide centers. So that is just really the overall what it does. There's a lot more detail certainly in the document, and if you have questions about any of this, I'm certainly happy to answer that. But we just wanted to, in the interest of time, kind of keep moving and talking through the amendments. So maybe I'll just pause here and see if you have any questions in general about the recommendation from the board.
Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. President. So what's the relationship between the center's framework and Vision 2050?
So the center's framework, it basically establishes a number of different avenues to implement. So one of those ways to implement is through Vision 2040 or Vision 2050. So it basically will inform some of the scope of the update of Vision 2050. So including the major military installations, for example, different types of regional centers, different types of manufacturing industrial centers. So it helps to sort of form and identify what types of places that we will be focusing on for investment and for growth as part of the Vision 2050 update.
So kind of foundational elements to the next update.
Some pretty foundational elements, yes.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, it also includes a few other things that have different routes to implement through administrative processes, that sort of thing.
Any other questions at this point? Okay.
Okay, so before we move into amendments, we have the sort of board action on the overall package to move so that the executive board should approve and initiate implementation of the regional centers framework update.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion to, on the Puget Sound, or the Growth Management Policy Board's recommendation, and then we'll step through the amendments.
So moved.
Motion and a second, so we have a main motion on the floor. I'm going to go through Amendment 1.
Great, so we will go through the amendments, and I've got the table right here. There we go. Okay, so we're going to go through just in numeric order. So Amendment 1 is from Councilmember Lambert to King County, and it is basically a text amendment on the project objectives around the environment, and perhaps she would like to speak to that.
All right. Councilmember Lambert, would you like to speak to your...
Thank you. I would, and it will be put forth by somebody else in the room because I'm an alternate. But I brought this concern up at the last PSRC Executive Board meeting and introduced the idea of clarifying what the intent of the paragraph was. Stating that the goal is to divert growth from the rural and resource lands, it portrays in a small part that gives the goal that it's negative to be living in the rural area. So rather, the intent should be that we protect the rural area and resource lands by focusing the majority of growth into the urban areas. After the last board meeting, I worked with staff from King County Executive's office, and they collaborated with me on the draft of this language. I believe this language better articulates the goals we are trying to accomplish without penalizing those who live in the unincorporated or rural areas, and I urge your support.
All right, is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I would move approval of Amendment 1.
Second.
Second.
Motion is second. Further discussion? Any comments? All right, all those in favor of Amendment 1 say aye.
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 Any opposed? Amendment 1 passes. All right, Amendment 2.
Great. Amendment 2 is from the City of Kent, from Mayor Ralph, and there's a footnote in the section on manufacturing industrial centers that describes the meaning of core industrial zoning, and this is something that had previously been amended by the Growth Management Policy Board. So this amendment would clarify that commercial uses within core industrial zones should be strictly limited to accessory uses, and perhaps the mayor would like to speak to it.
Okay. Mayor Ralph?
Thank you. So after further analysis and some conversation with surrounding cities, we would like to retract this amendment.
Right. So I'll assume there's no motion. Somebody could really cause some problems right now if you wanted to move the amendment.
Great. We are moving quickly. So Amendment 3 is from Sound City Association, from Councilmember Roberts. It addresses the role of transit and transportation demand management strategies in manufacturing industrial centers.
Okay, Councilmember Roberts.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you look at the difference between how transit is defined in the regional growth centers and the manufacturing industrial centers, there's a little bit of a disconnect in that in the manufacturing industrial centers, it only says that you're required to have access to transit or a defined transportation demand management strategy. To make it more consistent between the two types of centers, I worked with PSRC staff to propose this amendment that would say if you're in a regional transit system, the expectation should be that you have either plans for or have frequent transit or plan frequent local express or flexible transit service within the center. Again, it could be just a plan there. If you're not within the transit agency district, that clarifies the expectation to develop an alternative strategy to reduce the impacts of traffic. And I so move.
So there's a motion. Is there a second? Greg?
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Bremerton strongly opposes this amendment. We are one of the degrowth center that has less than 4,000 jobs in our center, and so what we have done is made commitments to a market study and also commitments to other infrastructure projects in our industrial center, and this is to to accommodate the need to show some forward action on our center. Right now, Kitsap Transit, even though we have our industrial center in a transit district, we don't have enough activity out there to justify frequent stops throughout that industrial center. If we were to go that route, we would be removing service from other areas in our county that actually need it. So just to wrap this up, this would be harmful to Bremerton. We have committed to other areas where we will be providing some growth, and we oppose this motion.
Okay. Other comments? Yes, Charlotte.
Thank you. I wonder if you would reread the suggested change.
If I might.
Yes, go ahead.
The suggested changes are two. On the narrative description, add jurisdictions and transit agencies should aim to serve all MICs with transit. The second one would be to strike the existing bullet on transit and add this language. If a MIC is within a transit service district, availability of existing or planned, frequent, local, express, or flexible transit service. If a MIC is outside a transit service district, documented strategies to reduce commute impacts throughout transportation demand management strategies consistent with the Regional Transportation Plan Appendix F. I mean, the two key words I think there are existing or planned, and then flexible.
Thank you.
Okay. Further comments or questions? Yes, Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I'm waiting for Charlotte to finish her. No, keep talking. I think I just wanted to check back in with Bremerton to see whether that clarification.
And I was just talking with Commissioner Garrido and we have a South Kitsap. It's a
South Kitsap ride.
South Kitsap ride. And I guess the definition would be, when you think of transit, we're thinking of a higher level of service, a more frequent level of service. And due to the late entry of this, and when was this entered, by the way, as an amendment?
So this one was submitted with the agenda packet that went out last Thursday.
Okay. So, this right here, just with myself and our staff analyzing it, we compare this to other levels of service that we're used to seeing in Bremerton, and we feel we couldn't, have that we shouldn't have that duplicated out into the county, and because I think that the intent of this was to provide a real level of bus service out there. With us, it's just not a fit. There's not enough activity out there to warrant it, and so we do oppose this.
But John, I'll get to you in a minute, but could I ask staff how this would be used or how this would be read or interpreted? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So as part of, this is relevant to both existing centers and new centers coming into the system. So if we have a new application for a manufacturing industrial center, we would expect that they are demonstrating either that they're within a service district and have some form of transit existing or planned, or that they are planning for transit demand management system or transportation demand management. For the existing regional centers, we're doing the sort of monitoring update in 2025 to ensure that there's consistency across all of our centers. And so at that point, we would also be applying this or reviewing basically for this. And if that is not consistent or not happening, that's something that we would report back to the board in 2025.
But to your timeline, for the industrial area in Bremerton,
yes,
they'd have essentially 7 years to either have existing or planned transit service to comply.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. John.
Chris, I don't think it was your intent that this eliminate consideration of a center, was it? I mean, I don't think that was your intent. It was more a policy issue, right?
That was not my intent to eliminate a center, and I think that the staff response, I mean, 7 years to plan transit service seems reasonable. But we had this discussion both at the GMPC and I believe this board about the designation of the Sumner Pacific Industrial Center, where there was some question about we are approving a center within sort of the core areas of the region, and there was no transit service. And that was just a question that we had as a board of whether or not, I mean, we ultimately approved that designation, but there was a question there about should there be transit serving a manufacturing industrial center when we approved that center.
Okay.
Could I get a definition of flexible transit services?
So it's pretty open. So it includes things like van pools. It includes also things like other types of service that are not necessarily operated by our regional or local transit systems, but our shuttle services, that type of thing.
Could be worker driver programs. Yeah.
Courtney.
Yeah, I'm going to speak similar to my colleague here. You know, my understanding is that previous discussions around this topic have focused on the difficulty of providing transit to mix because of the lack of density and the focus on goods production movement. The previous language that focused on defined transportation demand management strategies seemed to provide the flexibility that would make sense for the MIC environment. And with or without the amendment, transit service should clearly be included in that set of tools if appropriate to the MIC. I do share the concern that if significant transit investments are made in a manufacturing industrial area, that can lead to increased land values and push out some of our core lower density manufacturing needs. That's a concern that I speak from the port and has been shared throughout this process.
Okay. Rick?
All right.
Rick.
Oh, Rick.
Sorry.
Sorry, Rick.
Oh, that's fine, Greg. Speaking in favor of the motion, as a Pierce Transit Board member, I remember when the county took action that actually eliminated transit service from the Frederickson community. And it would have been nice actually to have something to present to the county council that would have showed them that there may be negative consequences to that action. So I see this as an opportunity to encourage either transit to get there or at least attempts to make sure that you're working towards that. So I'm in favor of the motion.
Greg.
All right, and so just one more comment, and then I'm definitely ready to move on. But, you know, I've just started on the Kitsap Transit Policy Board. There's been no talk about how the board would provide service to that area, part of the county. I haven't seen any long-range planning. And so I'm really hesitant to have faith that that's where we would go because it has not been addressed yet. And So I have to oppose this motion, and then I'm ready to move on.
Okay. Question is everybody else ready to move on? Any further comments or questions? Charlotte.
Thank you. My sense is that we do want transit out there. I think 7 years may not be quite long enough as we're starting a new MIC, and it takes some time to get the density and the demand. So maybe we would consider even a little more flexibility in that number of years. Perhaps proposing 10 years instead of 7?
Is that timeline a strict one, or because it does say plan for?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of the center's framework update, the 2025 deadline has a number of different things intersecting on it, and so I think it would be a little bit difficult to have 7 years for one set of for most of the standards, and then 10 for this particular one. But I think the word planned gives a bit of flexibility there. And I think also, you know, in terms of all of this, the intent is to report back to the board in 2025. And so I don't think any rash actions will take place without sort of considering the broader context of those centers.
Courtney.
And I will be very brief. That is exactly the point that I was trying to make. MICs are different than other centers. And so by covering them in one sweeping statement, we're not providing that flexibility. But I go back to the previous language that clearly says we should be having access to transit or defined transportation demand management strategies in place, gives us that flexibility to have those tools at our disposal, but does not lump MICs, which are different for all of the reasons we've already discussed.
Okay. I don't see any more cards up. So we'll vote on the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Roll call.
So, exactly. So if you're new to the executive board, we have weighted votes. So Sheila will go through the weighted vote, and we'll tally it up and find out what the answer is.
So, and I'll use my judgment. If it seems close, we'll get a roll call.
Go ahead, Sheila.
King County, Seattle, Bellevue, Kent, Kirkland, Renton,
No.
other cities and towns in King County, Kitsap County,
Yes, with the intent to work on it.
Bremerton, other cities and towns in Kitsap County,
No.
Pierce County,
Yes. Yes.
thank you, Tacoma, other cities and towns in Pierce County,
Yes.
Snohomish County,
Yes.
Everett, other cities and towns in Snohomish County, Port of Seattle, Port of Tacoma,
No.
Washington State Department of Transportation,
Aye.
Washington State Transportation Commission.
Aye.
Are there any jurisdictions that I have not called that are present? Thank you. Give us a moment.
77% yes.
77% yes, the amendment passes. So we will move on to Amendment 4.1.
Great. So Amendment 4 is broken into 3 different sections. So Amendment 4 is from Pierce County, from Executive Dammeier and Councilmember Richardson, and addresses the role of military installations. So I think we'll go through them separately just to kind of keep the conversation together. Although the first two, 4.1 and 4.2, address basically the creation of an implementation of a military center designation. And then 4.3 addresses the role of military installations in our funding framework. So perhaps we go through 4.1 first, and Executive Dammeier might want to speak to it.
Bruce, would you like to, or would you want to present it? Okay, yeah, Rick, thank you.
The one that's not listed gets to speak. So if, Dave, if it's okay, I'll just make one comment that will stand for all three of them since they're all interrelated. As many of you are aware, this is an issue that Pierce County in particular has been interested in for quite some time. I joined PSRC in 2011, and I've been talking about this since then, and I know since 2014, Pierce County has formally been moving this request forward. What this will do, and we appreciate the City of Tacoma coming on and adding their name to our amendment as well. What this is going to do is, I think, is acknowledge the value and the role that the military plays in our region, and acknowledge the impact that they have. Right now, not being able to weight these as centers, I think puts those of us who have these large military centers at a disadvantage when it comes to dealing with regional transportation. Joint Base Lewis McChord, 100,000 folks coming and going every single day, and not to acknowledge that, it's simply, to me, it makes it more difficult for those of us in Pierce County to explain to our constituents what the value of regional planning is when we identify such a large employer with such a tremendous impact on our travel times, and then not give them the designation and the ability to help solve these transportation plans. So I'm encouraging a yes vote. Again, this is an issue that Pierce County has been working on for quite some time, one that we've discussed at length, and I hope that we're able to advance this and allow the agency to start weighting these centers for the impact that they have. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have a motion on the amendment?
I'll move.
Motion and a second. All right. Further discussion?
Chair, if I can just,
yes.
Commissioner or Councilmember Talbot, you're moving all three, 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3 together or individually?
I don't know procedurally if we can. I
think it's totally up to you as to whether you want to do them
it's
individually
up to you.
or as a
they
group.
do. I don't know if they work individually.
I was going to say, I don't think that they would necessarily work individually, so it makes all the sense in the world to take them as one item. So as long as procedurally we can do that, my motion would be to adopt 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3.
Okay. Second agree? All right. All right. We're in discussion. Yes, Bruce.
So I have a procedural question, and again, this is my first time going through the process here. The double underlined, are they, I would have considered those amendments to the amendment, but I'm not sure how we treat them here. Are they voted on separately, or are they friendly amendments, or how do we treat that here at PSRC?
The double underline was to show the changes from what was included in the prior version, it must have been version 2. So provided that the motion maker is including all of the changes, then I would say that you don't need an amendment to the amendment, provided that that's the intent of the motion maker, to include both the single underline and the double underline changes. For those of you that were tracking or weren't tracking, the single underline that was first proposed by Pierce County in some subsequent discussions with the City of Tacoma, the additional changes were proposed that are shown in double underline. So that's the current version of the amendment.
Just to be clear, my motion included as presented.
We're going off the March 21st memo.
March 21st. So those changes, the underlined and double underlined, are included in the motion. All right. Discussion. Rob?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to encourage my colleagues to vote no on this set of amendments for a couple of reasons. The first of which is I think there are some real recognitions about the distribution of funds to the countywide processes versus the regional processes. And I think what this is intending to do is to further weaken the pool of funding for regional projects. And I stand against that because of a couple of reasons. One, the countywide processes allow for each individual county to spend that money however they want. And that's a majority of the funding, folks. It's 60%. Hasn't always been that way, but that's the way that it is now. And any individual county, including Pierce County, could spend 100% of of those dollars in whatever way, shape, or form they choose, which could be all on military installations. And my challenge here is that by designating a military installation as a designee for regional competition, is that we don't then also get to have any control over either the land use or transportation policies on those bases. And so we have intentionally created a set of regional centers because we understand as a region that that's where we want to direct population and employment growth. And this would take those transportation dollars and focus them in a place where we don't have any of those controls, both on the land use or on the transportation side. I would also just add, there's a couple of other things that these amendments do from a technical perspective that I think puts the cart before the horse. Specifically calls out base-related transportation projects as an eligibility requirement. So presupposes that the project selection task force has to include that. That's always been part of our four-county region, elected officials getting together to determine what we think are the right eligibility criteria. So I think we should allow that process to continue in the way that it has for the last 20, 25 years. And then the final thing is that, just generally, we don't in any other instance call out any other kind of funding requirement for any other kind of center. And this specifically says military installations are not only going to be eligible, but it also says we're going to change the funding criteria to increase their eligibility requirements. So for me, I just think that there is a whole lot of challenges associated with these set of amendments, and I'm going to be encouraging my colleagues to vote no.
Thank you. Ron?
Well, I will encourage you to say yes, and let me give you some of the information from the Transportation Policy Board, some of the discussion that went on. The recognition is that the bases in our four counties represent $15 to $20 billion a year in both salaries and contracts. In Pierce County, it's more about salaries at JBLM, but in Kitsap County and Snohomish County, it's about hard construction that goes on at those bases. Now, the way the funding of the military goes, it's all done by, I can speak more for the Army, having dealt with that before, on major construction Army. Nobody's asking, nor would this allow anything inside the wire of these gated communities to build roads internally. They do that differently. For my JBLM, their major work is going to be done with one of the Connecting Washington projects, which is the I-5 JBLM corridor that has about $600 million attached to it right now. So from the the constant financial standpoint, I think that's very important. An interesting discussion and well laid out at the Transportation Board was about TDM. We need to vote no because we can't do what Rob clearly laid out is true. However, in talking with Mr. Millar, I then very easily have WSDOT, JBLM, and Sue Dreyer, the CEO of Pierce Transit, getting together to try to look at that, and Mr. Mello, who also made that argument, to push that forward in terms of more with carpooling and other items that need to be looked at. So I'm not so sure Rob is entirely correct, because if we get 6 projects in Pierce County, the military installations there would have to compete against Canyon Road number 29 as we continue building Canyon Road from Frederickson as an example. I don't think that's where it's going to be. You are absolutely correct. We could take it all and give it to JBLM. I'm not going to do that, but it's nothing inside the wire of those installations. That's not, at least that's what I can speak of for Pierce County. And I would look to recognize the volume of money and jobs and construction. I understand housing. JBLM only houses 30% of the folks that's there, and it's up to Congress if they want to do more, and they're not going to do more than that. But $15 to $20 billion a year to the state economy is pretty important, and that's how I will be voting yes for their recognition. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Claudia?
Thanks. I have a question about the amendment and then a comment. What's called Amendment 4.3 on our sheet states that we are determining here, if we approve this, that there will be a new category that becomes part of the next regional transportation funding competition, and then we're to develop criteria. And Councilmember Johnson spoke to this a little bit, but does this mean that there would automatically, if approved, be a category that gets funded and competes like only military projects, military-related projects against military-related projects, sort of like we do with the small cities, that like it sort of like puts us on a road to have a set-aside off the top? They don't compete with other regional projects if this gets approved?
So let me help out here a little bit. So our next project selection cycle will be in 2020. We pulled together a project selection task force a year prior. I think the direction from this amendment would be to convene a group to be able to begin to answer those questions. And then in anticipation of the 2020 project selection, you would have the final authority as the executive board to approve that. But we would begin to work on what those criteria and options would be, council member.
So, but I guess my question is more a policy question than a process question. Does this create a bucket with nothing in it? And then we'll debate later about how much, if anything, goes in the bucket? Or are people expecting that if we create this bucket, that some amount of money will be in it? Are we deciding that today or setting that expectation today? I ask my colleagues who are proposing this amendment.
May I? Dave?
Who's that?
Over here. Thanks.
Yes, you may.
The intention of the county was and has been to identify and recognize the importance of the military centers. It's my understanding it would be in competition with, not necessarily a set aside. And again, for me, the important part is if our job here is to solve transportation problems into Puget Sound, then we need to recognize where the transportation problems are coming from and to not acknowledge these military centers and their huge impact, I think, has resulted in our not being able to address the needs around JBLM for the last 20 years, resulting in the problems that we have. And so this, in a sense, to Rob's point, it does mean that this will be competing, but if our job is to solve transportation, then we should be making sure that those dollars are going where they're most needed, not where they're not necessarily directed because something hasn't been identified.
Okay, so I'll change my question into a comment. This reads to me like if we approve this, it will create a set-aside that then will set expectations that there should be some money in it that will then be directed specifically to military installations that then do not compete with the rest of the regional projects. So regional projects go into a regional bucket. They all have to compete based on criteria, and the ones that do the best because they meet the criteria in our plan, like serving centers, which or meeting other kinds of needs that we have identified over many years of planning at this organization. Now, military installations don't go in there and compete based on whether their needs match with the needs of other projects, but they get their own separate pot. And I can't support that. That is, first of all, this is not the time when we make those decisions. This is way out of order. It's not, we're not weighing and looking at the same kind of information that we normally look at when we set up these kinds of funding decisions, and we're doing it years in advance. So this particular portion of the amendment really troubles me. And I can't support it because we haven't done the kind of weighing and sifting that we normally would do. Secondly, I just want to say there's a real issue here. I mean, this is a real issue. I think we can all acknowledge that there's a lot of impact on the transportation system based on the military bases. Anybody who has the fortune or misfortune to drive to Olympia from this part of PSRC goes right through it and feels that pain, and for those who have to deal with it on a daily basis, we can only have great sympathy. But what I would say is that we don't have any ability to control what happens at that base. If it gets bigger, if it gets smaller, if it shuts down, if it stays open, is all a decision of the federal government. And they don't, as far as I know, provide any funding to help with the impacts of their growth and their continued operation on the major roads around it. And they should. They really should. So the question I think before us that this amendment as a whole proposes is, do we do less of the regional projects that have been waiting in line in our plan in order to subsidize that activity? Yes or no? And my answer is I don't think that we should, but that's not to say that I don't acknowledge the problem. I just don't know that this is the solution. Thank you.
Doug Richardson would like to speak.
Okay, I'll get you in a minute. Amy.
I just wanted to thank the GMPB because I know this has been years of really difficult struggle, 2-3 years, and I do think that it's sort of out of order that we're considering a last-minute amendment of this magnitude. I also acknowledge the need, but when we really think about centers and what they mean in our region that we're deciding where we're going to take housing and where we're going to create jobs, and we don't have the ability to do that. And the local jurisdictions that have a center will also be making investments in that center. And, you know, we don't have the ability to do that in a military base. It's an interesting question, and we should talk about it more, but we won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Okay, Roger, and then I think it was John on the line, and then Charlotte.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm supportive in general of what the proponents of this are trying to do. I think it's unfortunate we're considering all three of these together because there are parts of it that I think are timely and there are parts of it that I think need more work. So I would propose an amendment that we only consider Amendment 4.1 and then we make a decision on that and then go to 4.2, and if we make a decision on that, then go to 4.3, because I'm concerned with 4.3, the timeliness of it. Is this the appropriate place to be making that decision, or as Councilmember Balducci said, we have a process for setting that in place. And then the Amendment 4.2, the asterisks and the subtext is where I have a little heartburn. Base related, you know, we talk an awful lot in this region about transit-oriented development, and I think many of us know that there's a subtle but very important difference between transit-oriented development and transit-adjacent development. Investment adjacent to a military center may or may not support that military center. It may instead support speculative land development and sprawl. So I would really like to be able to see this body have a vote on establishing a major military center designation and then talk about Amendment 4.2 and then talk about Amendment 4.3. So I would amend the motion to just deal with 4.1 at this time.
I'll second that amendment.
Yeah. So we have a motion to amend the amendment, and we'll only do this once.
To take each one individually.
Yeah, to take it, and the motion is to take each one of these sections individually. We could do it this way, or I could ask the original maker to amend the original amendment.
Dave?
Yes.
Yeah. As the original maker of the motion, I'm comfortable with that. So if it's the body's desire to take these one at a time, I'm fine with that.
Then any violent opposition to that? Bruce?
So we'll just, we don't have to go through all the amendment Robert's rules stuff. Great, thanks.
Unless I hear parliamentarian saying we should vote on it. So, Bruce.
So one of the things that I think is important, though, is the broader debate about the issue, I think, involves all three. So we need to, there's a very big picture and substantive debate that we need to have. And I'm a little concerned that if you, at some point, if we we might want to have that debate before and then go and vote on all 3 amendments separately, because that concept is very important. And if we only look at it in a micro, we might be missing kind of the broader implications of the policy.
Any more discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Doug, or is it Doug? Amendment to the, any discussion on the amendment to the amendment? So this is to divide the 3 parts. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. Mr. Richardson had wanted to speak. I don't know that he still does. I just wanted to remind you that he had said that a time ago.
So, let me just clarify what's on the floor right now. We're just now discussing 4.1, but since we've been discussing the whole issue, I'll take comments either on Amendment 4.1 specifically or the package. So, Doug?
Yeah, I don't want this to be my opportunity to speak on the entire package. I was really trying to be recognized to answer some of the questions. It's the county's intent not to create a separate bucket, but to take that couple of years to come up with the staff, coming up with the criteria for the military center and then competing in that category regionally. So it's not to create a bucket by itself, to have funding put in to compete against that as an example.
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to do Charlotte, then Becky, and then Terry, and then Catherine.
Thank you. I just, as Kitsap County, the military is our largest employer in the county, and that means they're putting a lot of people on the roads to come to work. They use some really ingenious methods to reduce transportation, and Kitsap Transit is a big player in that. But I just can't underscore enough when we're talking about major military installations, and I think the major in front of it is really the description that we need to be thinking about and developing criteria for. It impacts us every single day, working day. Anyone who lives in Kitsap, anywhere, knows that there is going to be impacts during the day from our military installations, and that it's important for us to be addressing all kinds of transportation improvements and methods to reduce people in individual cars. But it is our single largest employer, and that therefore says it does impact our roadways.
Thank you.
First of all, as Kitsap Other Cities, I'm representing not only the City of Paulsboro, but the City of Bainbridge Island and the City of Port Orchard, and I checked with my colleagues about how they wanted to handle this. I will be supporting these because of their direction. A couple points. This is meant to allow military centers to be recognized during the regional competition, no buckets, just to be a regional center, because they are. They are regional centers by their size, by their level of employment, by the amount of dollars they drive. They are regional centers. And that money is not to go into the military center, but to support those communities around the regional centers, which, by the way, they don't pay any property taxes. Okay, military centers don't pay any property taxes. So a big hunk of funding that local jurisdictions use in order to drive road creation or support other services are not paid by these bases. Okay, so it's an enormous hunk of land that is eliminated from our tax base. So it is true that we do not control what we plan and what plans inside, what goes on inside the bases. In fact, frankly, it's pretty hard to even get on them if you're not military. I mean, they're cities that we normal civilian types don't have ready access to. But I compliment the people in Pierce County that wrote this language, because it says very clearly here that complete a joint land use study or similar coordinating planning efforts with demonstrated implementation actions. That's JLUS. That's what we call JLUS. And the the bases in Kitsap just completed a JLUS study so that they could work cooperatively with the city of Bremerton, with the rest of the jurisdictions inside Kitsap County. I think it's imperative that if, in fact, these amendments pass and we do treat these as regional centers, that we do cooperatively plan with the bases. And there is a methodology at the federal level for that to occur. And I think the third thing is, and this is what I had suggested when this all first started really bubbling up big time at the Transportation Policy Board, which is we need another funding stream. We need a funding stream from the Department of Defense to help us mitigate the impact that these bases have on our regional community in Snohomish County, in Pierce County, and in Kitsap County. These are large employers having huge impacts on their neighboring communities. Yes, it is an employment base. There's no doubt about that. But they do, as I said, they don't pay property taxes. So we are stretched from a revenue perspective in order to handle those impacts. There's no impact fees from the Navy, okay? So I would ask you to consider these amendments, especially Amendment Number 1. I think that's important, and I think that we all need to collectively work with the DOD, the Department of Defense, to find that secondary revenue stream and to bring it into Puget Sound Regional Council so that we can use that money in order to address these impacts. Thank you.
Catherine, sorry.
Thank you. I'm representing the Sound Cities Association, and we do not support these amendments for many of the reasons that have been previously articulated. We have members that represent us on the GMPB, and they thoroughly vetted and reviewed these, I think, very similar or the same amendments previously, and it was not supported by Sound Cities. Just saying we're consistent. I think we need to have respect for the GMPB. They've worked on this for many, many months, years probably, and I think, and I do value their work as well. I definitely support our military and our military bases. I think that they are a key element, and as an elected official, I've gone on tours of many of the bases and respect the folks that work there. I think, however, we have limited funding sources and that are to go to specific for specific criteria and specific rationale for growth of our centers. I think one of the things I was going to say, and Claudia stole it from me, is that we don't know, we're looking at sort of long-term planning. We don't have any control, and we don't know what the bases are going to do. I mean, there's every couple of years or so it pops up that they're going to close this base or they're going to significantly reduce the folks that work there. So I think to take this limited funding source and, spread it out additionally is really not fair to the existing centers. I think that, I appreciate the comment about the DOD and asking for funding, but I certainly think that they may view this as solving their problem for them if we come up with funding sources. So I do think we need to continue this discussion and how we address our military centers. I just don't think that we're prepared to take action to support this at this time.
Harry, then Roger and Claudia and John. And then we'll move on from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I sit in an unusual spot of serving on all three policy boards. So I've kind of heard all sides of this. I understand what Pierce County wants, and I have actually supported that on the Growth Management Board. On the Transportation Board, I had to vote against it because I represent community transit, and they recommended that I vote against it. I listened to my boss. But I represent Snohomish County. So it's back to Snohomish County, right? So I'm in favor of recognizing military centers. Claudia's brought up a really good point about we call them unintended consequences in Snohomish County, that we may enact something and it might be perceived as a carve-out or a set-aside, and I wouldn't be in favor of that. So what I'm suggesting, and I think I'm hearing this around the table from other people, is that Snohomish County will support, or my vote for Snohomish County will support 4.1, which is recognizing the military centers. Amendments 4.2 and 4.3, I think most of us agree something needs to be done, but not at this time. So what I'm recommending is on 4.1 be approved. 4.2 and 4.3, I'm recommending that we have staff work on these and bring back options to the appropriate board in the future. That's what I'm recommending. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Roger?
Thank you, and just remind all our colleagues that what we're debating now is just 4.1. And
I did allow comments on the package.
But in terms of the vote is on 4.1, and I feel, military centers, they do exist. They are a reality. They have a regional impact. As someone who lives and works in Olympia and gets to share a good deal of time with you guys, my trip from Olympia to here can vary between 1 and 5 hours, depending on what's happening in that corridor. And the same thing happens at the other bases. So unless and until we as a body recognize that military centers have a regional impact, we're not going to begin to address the issue. So I am in favor of Amendment 4.1.
Okay, Claudia, and then John Adams. I'm sorry, but
I want to offer that I've already spoken, so I'm happy to wait until those who haven't yet have an opportunity.
John?
So, a question. Does 4.1 essentially create, does that lead to or mandate that military installations, major military installations, will be considered a regional growth center?
No, I think it creates the term military center, and then it will be up to the board to direct how that should be considered in other implementation actions.
Well,
could I offer something? So the recommendation of the Growth Management Policy Board was to take this up during the update of Vision 2040. So to me, this amendment modifies that. So this would create the term, but the underlying motion carries with it the recommendation from the Growth Management Policy Board.
I'm going to speak in opposition to it, just on 4.1. We took this through GMPB. We recognize military installations throughout the work of the PSRC. This is essentially creating a single designation for a single employer. That just strikes me as not being very smart growth management. But these are not regional growth centers. I mean, that's where this started from. So I like what the Growth Management Policy Board did working through this. I think it still provides the opportunity to move forward. Military centers are recognized throughout our work. But this is going to lead to most likely calling it something that it's not in terms of regional growth, and I'm not going to support that.
Thank you. Kathy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I agree with what Roger Millar said a few minutes ago. And you just have to drive by there any day to realize the impact. I don't believe this is a single employer. I think it's very different. These are the people that are putting their lives on the line for me and for others. So I don't look at them as a single employer. We're always going to say the money's limited. That's always the answer to everything. I feel sad, actually, that we are still talking about this. This has been years that we've been talking about it. And I feel like we've kicked the can, and then we kicked it again, and then we promised them that we might kick it again at some point, maybe sort of. That isn't how we show collaboration and cooperation. I think there are special needs. There are huge impacts on two of our neighboring counties. And I just think that we need to be cognizant that all our needs are different. And if they have been so clear for so long, help me, help me, help me, that it's time we help them. So I'm hoping that we will do something here in one of these three amendments to help them.
Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I came ready here today to support all of the work the GMPD did. And it was a lot. And some of the discussions and debates were epic, especially around this topic. And but we just had an amendment that I believe affected the future discussions at Kitsap Transit pretty substantially. And we are not all clear on how we would support an industrial center. That was a big move, and we made it here. And so, just to back up a little bit, when I supported the military center designation, I believed that the centers could stand on their own merit and would compete with other centers. And the conversation could be shaped in a way where I think it would be where you would understand that perspective. Saying that we don't have control over the federal government, there's a lot of folks and things that we have going on we don't have control over. A lot of them are geopolitical forces. It could be an import that's from a country that's under strife. It could be a tariff thrown out there on something like steel. I mean, those things can turn industries upside down. And we here don't have control over that. There's a lot of things that we don't. And there's other examples that would come out when this discussion comes forward. I hope at the end of the day, whether this motion passes or fails, that we include this in our 2040 update and make it a strong priority to discuss this. So I think one other thing to point out, we have some major ports here, and they're fantastic job creators, and they just help our quality of life so much. Port of Seattle, Port of Tacoma. Those shipping containers arrive over the sea. What an installation like the Navy does is their mission is to keep the shipping lanes free, so this trade can continue. And it's something to keep in mind as we move forward on this discussion, that we don't enjoy this free commerce back and forth without free shipping lanes and safe free shipping lanes. So I'll close my comments. I'll be supporting the motion, but at the same time, I did respect the work of the Growth Management Policy Board.
And just to be clear, the main motion is to adopt the recommendation of the Growth Management Policy Board, which does direct us and does support taking this issue up and developing and making it into the update of Vision 2040. So just be clear, that's not been sidelined here, but that is part of the main motion. Victoria?
Thank you. The great thing about speaking last is that what you wanted to say has been said by most everybody else, so I'll be brief. We will be supporting this in Tacoma. There was a lot of conversation in the beginning about us not supporting this, but we think that the amendments address our concerns. And I completely understand that, the federal government should step up and should take care of it, but I don't think we can wait until you can't get through I-5 or get through that corridor at all before we make an investment. So I will be supporting this.
Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to make my comments kind of in general of the whole approach, and then we can address the amendments as we go up. First of all, this is my first year, completing my first year on PSRC. So like some of you, like Ron Lucas, I haven't been here forever. But I will tell you that the strangest thing, I think, from anybody outside of the region, looking at the 30 years of regional planning has been the fact that there has been absolutely no recognition of major military installations in our planning efforts. That is bizarre certainly since we are charged primarily with transportation planning, to not acknowledge that tens of thousands of our citizens are traveling to and from these locations every single day. To exclude that from planning around transportation seems nonsensical. From our kind of looking at our EDD, our economic development side, to not address that combined they are the single largest employer in the state of Washington, and even individually major military installations are the single largest employer in Snohomish County and in Pierce County. So it seems nonsensical to me that we would be kind of having this discussion today. It begs, I don't know where we got the processes that exclude or discriminate against military installations. I don't know how we got here for the last 30 years. But with that, we're here. You know, I do think it kind of currently represents our singular largest failure in kind of regional planning. Let's talk a little bit about process. Pierce County, along with others with major military installations, have been working hard to engage the process in the right way for the last at least 2 years. Ron would say much, much longer than that. But I can tell you, I am very familiar with the last 2 years. We have been told many things, many ways about the right way to engage the process. It was engage in the regional framework. Then some said, no, engage in 2050. Well, the regional framework is the feeder into 2050. So that's why we're at this point here. Going through the Growth Management Planning Board, there was a whole series of discussions, and then at one point toward the end, where we believed that was the right way to weigh in, we're told, no, it really should be in the Transportation Policy Board. So after it was defeated in the Growth Management Planning Board on the basis that it was more transportation, went to the Transportation Board at the last minute. Now let's be clear, the involvement in the Growth Management Planning Board and the Regional Centers Framework has been throughout the entire process. We can show you engagement in the entire process, so the discussion of last minute amendments is a little difficult. I will say the amendment in the Transportation Policy Board was last minute. That was last minute. That was probably more born out of frustration than policy, so I can kind of understand that, which is how we get here today. And I would say a couple of things. The amendments before you represent, and I would dispute the characterization that these amendments are the same thing that were considered by the Policy Board, the Growth Management Policy Board, because they don't. They have been specifically crafted trying to find a consensus position, trying to address the concerns that have been raised in the previous Policy Board meetings, and to find that middle ground so we can move forward in a constructive way. As specific examples, one of the things that was kind of brought up is, well, we don't control land use on military bases. That's true. We don't control land use, but we have influence on that land use. And as Mayor Erickson pointed out, the amendment to 4.2, yes. To which one am I looking at? Becky, the J-Luce piece. First one, thank you. Specifically addresses the comments and the concerns people had about land use. Well, again, we don't have control, certainly not, but we do have influence, and we're trying to use that to have greater influence in that. There was a lot of concern about issues of transit. The amendment, the double underscore in 4.2 specifically is trying to address the issue of transit related to getting access to there. It's been pointed out by the Secretary of Transportation very well that if we think that these major military centers don't have regional impact. If you drive I-5 every day, they do have regional impact. And I would argue that the fact that our predecessors on this August group have not addressed this in the past is part of the reason why the state is now, why we're putting $650 million, whatever, hundreds of millions of dollars into widening the I-5 through JBLM. And if we instead had put some money proactively addressing regional interests toward getting transit there, that would be much more significant. Now, there has been a comment made that, well, why don't you just put all your local transit, your county transit dollars there, or your transit money? Well, part of the problem is JBLM is way at the southern end of our county. It's really difficult to get transit there and not address the other issues. So that's a problem, and I would argue that it has significant regional impact and therefore should be regionally considered. I also heard discussion about concern for a set-aside. It's been clarified by many people in many ways. There is no intent for this to be a set-aside. The approach of this is to recognize the regional significance as a regional planning organization, and that we should include that addressing regional impacts. So it is that should just compete. And lastly, I would say one of the concerns that has been raised in the Growth Management Planning Board is that, well, this doesn't meet the criteria of a regional center or a manufacturing industrial center, and therefore we shouldn't use those criteria. I would agree. Yes, it doesn't. It is different. It doesn't fit into one of those categories well. So that's why I think creating a new category is appropriate. But we do need to make some movement forward on, and the offering to have the staff develop some criteria that go into place in 2 years was an effort at really making a reasonable compromise to get us moving forward, as opposed to the standard. I was in the legislature. I know the best way to kill a bill is just next time. We'll get to that next time. So there is some pressure here to say, no, we have waited for 30 years, and I don't say we in Pierce County, but we, the region, 30 years of not addressing the significance and the impact of our major military installations, be they in Snohomish County, Kitsap County, or Pierce County. So this is a very significant issue, and there have been a lot of people that have worked very hard to strike a balance that would be acceptable to this body. So I just wanted to highlight that as we go in. So with that, that'll conclude my broad picture debate, Mr. President.
Thank you. And just to note, we are 10 minutes past our adjournment time for this meeting. And I was not going to comment, but I do want to make a brief comment. We have a major military base in our county. We plan for it. We plan around it. We recognize it in our county comprehensive plan. It's a big part of our economy. I think what we're talking about today is a system that allocates the limited regional dollars we get, that we have some discretion over here in the Puget Sound region. And I guess I would argue these military bases really are a state and a national issue and a responsibility also. Of course, they affect us regionally. But I'm very concerned, and I promised Executive Danmeyer to keep an open mind on this, but I'm very concerned. I don't understand, until I see the whole picture, the implications of this designation and doing this at this point on our regional pot of dollars, and whether it's equitable across counties, what the impact is on the regional funding allocations that are made. I very much support the Growth Management Policies Board's recommendation that we do essentially what the amendment's asking for, when we start to develop these criteria and bake it into the update of Vision 2040, because we all know this is an important issue in all our counties. But I'm very concerned that this has not been baked and that we're losing sight that this is what we're really talking about is the allocation of our very limited regional dollars, and they may be even more limited in the future than they have been in the past. So, further comment? All right. I'm going to call for vote on Amendment 4.1. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Okay. No. Roll call.
King County,
No.
Seattle, Bellevue,
No.
Kent, Kirkland, Renton, other cities and towns in King County, Kitsap County, Bremerton,
Yes.
other cities and towns in Kitsap County,
Yes.
Pierce County,
Yes.
Tacoma, other cities and towns in Pierce County,
Yes.
Snohomish County,
Yes.
No. Splitters.
Everett,
Yes.
other cities and towns in Snohomish County,
No.
Port of Seattle, Port of Tacoma,
Yes.
Washington State Department of Transportation,
Yes.
Washington State Transportation Commission. Are there other jurisdictions present that I've missed?
So it's 59% against.
59% no. The amendment fails. So let's move on to Amendment 4.2. Does that? Doesn't make any, I don't think the others stand with, without 4.1. All right, so the main motion on the floor is to accept the recommendation of the Growth Management Policy Board, which again.
Dave, we have one more.
I'm
amendment
sorry.
And just, I
That was
appreciate
wishful
everyone's
thinking.
patience, Mr. President. The budget item we can take up at next meeting, and, we can close the loop on the comments from the transportation plan if we just want to focus on completing this item.
We still have Amendment 5.
Yes, I've been reminded of that.
We're getting to that next. Thank you,
So,
Councilmember.
Move on to Amendment 5.
So Amendment 5 addresses the expectations for countywide centers. So it makes several changes to the section on countywide centers. It basically states that the table that's provided should be sort of factors as provided as guidance for local counties to develop their own set of standards. And it removes the sort of numeric criteria that are included as part of the table on countywide centers. And so perhaps Pierce
Who
County
would like to speak to this? Bruce, so we have a motion and second. Does somebody want to speak to the amendment? Rick?
Can you start?
Thank you. We're going to do this in tandem. I'll start. This is, which one are we on here? 5?
5.
Apologize. So this is obviously on the countywide growth centers. Just to be brief, most importantly, this would make the criteria that has been established for the mix within the centers to be a guidance as opposed to being fixed. I think this would allow for the county, which we're given the responsibility of establishing the centers, and yet then we have the regional body coming in and dictating to us and other counties as to the mix. This would allow for us to have more local control. Thank you.
All right. Terry?
I agree. To me, this is just simple. We have the regional money, and we compete on that and everything. But the countywide centers, the monies go to the counties. I remember I worked with Councilmember Young from Pierce County on this. Same issue with Growth Management Board. It's just this simple. Frankly, I know a lot about Snohomish County, but I don't know a lot about Pierce County. So I don't think Snohomish County should dictate to Pierce County how they should spend countywide money. We're not talking regional money, we're talking countywide money. Conversely, Pierce County, frankly, doesn't know very much about Snohomish County. So they don't have any intention of dictating to Snohomish County how we allocate our center money, or money for centers. Nor should we tell King County what to do, nor should King County tell us what to do. So to me, it's all about local control. This isn't about getting more money or taking money from any other source, because the money is already allocated to each county. It's very simple. So we agree with Pierce County. I'll be voting with Pierce County and just saying, let the county decide, local control, how that money should be allocated. And these are very reasonable suggestions that they've made. Thank you.
Rob?
I'm going to respectfully disagree, Councilmember Ryan. I mean, I think we do have a lot of flexibility on those countywide dollars, but I also think it's important for us to set some minimum floor. And this amendment effectively eliminates that minimum. If you turn to page 2 of the amendment, which is on the final page of our packet, page 6, you'll see the elimination of 10 activity units, thresholds per acre, elimination of the planned minimum mix of uses, elimination of any minimums related to industrial land, elimination of the minimum criteria associated with industrial lands. I mean, I support flexibility, and I agree with that goal of flexibility, but if we don't have some sort of minimum criteria, we will be effectively throwing out what has been years of process and work to try to establish a set of growth management goals and objectives. And I just think that this amendment, again, late in the process, rejects the multiple months, if not years, of conversations that we had at GMPB to set at least a minimum floor.
Smallest thing to clarify, this is not related to manufacturing industrial centers.
All right, further comments? Yes, Bruce.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking in favor, excuse me, maybe flavor is better at this point. Speaking in favor of the amendment, the discussion we just had, I heard many people say, well, you've got flexibility with your regional dollars. Go use those to do whatever you want. And then we come back with this, which says we don't have flexibility with regional dollars. That's a concern. I appreciate Councilmember Johnson's comment about kind of procedurally, this is appearing at the last minute. But as I recall, at the Growth Management Planning Board, the amendment that put these criteria in, that put the greater restrictions and control at the PSRC level here, that amendment came in at the very last day and maybe walked into the meeting. So when we talk about last minute amendments, I think this was out in proper time for people to do it. The third thing I would say is that don't forget, we already look at all and approve all the comprehensive plans. So that we still have a lot of control and influence over the process. To go down to this next level, to me, seems to be contrary to the previous debate and contrary to allowing kind of regional creativity as we implement. So I would be asking for a yes vote.
Any further comments? Mike? And Catherine? Mike?
Thanks. There are tiers in this whole system, and I want to be clear that the regional pot of money isn't a free-for-all to do anything you want to do with regardless of growth management. And so flexibility, yes, but some standards are really important, I think. And so I think we do have the different tiers because at the regional tier, we're focused very closely on these policies. And when you remove it a tier and go to the county tier, there is more flexibility, but there still should be some standards. If we wanted to say, let's throw growth management out and just make up our own rules locally, that's where I feel like this type of amendment takes us.
Yeah, again, speaking on behalf of the Sound Cities Association, I think we're starting to confuse a little bit, flexibility with consistent criteria is the way I look at it. And to me, taking out just pretty much everything that sort of says, that complements the Growth Management Act or what we want to see these centers accomplish, it's not providing flexibility with how it's being used, but it's being consistent that everybody has to follow the same rules. So I think I'm actually saying a lot of what Mike said, so I'll be quiet now.
Derek, and then Chris.
Yeah, just to be clear, no one's saying no standards, and that's a misnomer. What we're saying is each county should set their own standards. It's not that there won't be any standards. It's just that, for example, Kitsap could never compete on the same level as King County. Couldn't happen. Don't have the population. Don't have the jobs. So this, all we're saying is let each county set their own standards. Thank you for letting me clarify that.
Chris.
Thank you. I think that from an on-the-ground perspective, I think that we sort of all agree that flexibility in each is important and that each county is different. But when you actually look at what the standards are set for a county-wide growth center in the proposal, they're very minimal standards. If you look at it, 10 activity units is pretty much covers every single urban block within the region. I mean, it's a very low standard to even put in here. And all the second bullet point of a minimum mix of uses, I mean, does sort of specifically call it, we want some jobs and some housing within these growth centers. And so, I mean, this is a very low threshold of a standard that most places, I mean, I can think of at least 3 centers, relatively large centers in Shoreline that would qualify. Lake Forest Park would qualify as in their town center area as a growth center. City of Edmonds would qualify as a growth center. I mean, these urban areas would just meet these qualifications just by what they are today. So, I mean, there's really not this putting a standard in it, taking out the standard really makes it really loose when the standard itself is relatively a small bar to hurdle clear just as proposed. Thank you.
All right. Let's vote on this. All right. So the amendment 5, there's a motion to approve the amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Here we go. Yeah, let's do a roll call.
King County. Seattle. Bellevue.
No.
Kent. Kirkland. Renton.
No.
Other cities and towns in King County? No. Kitsap County?
Yes.
Bremerton?
Yes.
Other cities and towns in Kitsap County?
Yes.
Pierce County?
Yes.
Tacoma?
Yeah.
Other cities and towns in Pierce County?
Yes.
Snohomish County?
Yes.
Everett?
No.
Other cities and towns in Snohomish County?
No.
Port of Seattle?
No.
Port of Tacoma?
Yes.
Washington State Department of Transportation?
No.
Washington State Transportation Commission? Are there other jurisdictions present that I've missed? Against.
Motion fails, 64 no, 64%. Okay, so we're back to the main motion, which is the recommendations of the Growth Management Policy Board as amended, and there was 2 amendments that passed, I believe. Yes, Bruce.
Mr. President, pursuant to Section 9 of the PRC bylaws, I move to require a 2/3 vote on final passage.
I'll turn to my parliamentarian to tell me what the heck that is.
So if you're not familiar, presuming a lot of folks are, Section 9 of our Executive Board bylaws state that a 2/3 vote may be called if the board members representing a county, the largest city within that county, and other cities and towns within that county unanimously call for a 2/3 vote. So Executive Dameyer, as the county executive from Pierce County, if you have agreement from the mayor of Tacoma and the other cities and towns within Pierce County, then the overall approval of the center's framework would require a supermajority vote. So, Mayor? Yes. Okay. So that would be in order.
Okay. I think we might also have Kitsap County as well.
Okay. Any further discussion on the main motion? We'll just move to a roll call vote. Can we? All right.
So I am going to urge a no vote on final passage. I am concerned that the process here, I think, is certainly concerning to me as a regional planner, and I hope it would be concerning to all of you. I believe the purpose of one of the primary goals of this body is to promote regional cooperation and consensus building around our policies. And I am very concerned that, as evidenced by this and the issues as they came up through other boards, that we are seeing kind of significant balkanizing of positions. That is not good for us at all. I think we need to be reevaluated. Final passage is not debatable?
I'm sorry, I thought we were understanding this was on the 2/3 vote.
No, that is invoked by the.
So they, okay, thank you. I apologize.
Yes, that's okay. That has been invoked by Pierce County and other cities and Tacoma. So we are doing a 2/3 vote, but now we're back on the main motion and we'll require a 2/3 vote. Go ahead.
So thank you for the clarification. I know that this is an unusual, the 2/3 is unusually procedurally, so I think it's good. But for me, I believe it is important that we set the proper tone and the proper expectations of regional collaboration and cooperation and consensus building, that we do the hard work of consensus building through the process. I was very concerned that the Growth Management Planning Board had a series of very divided votes as mirrored at this body. I was very concerned at the Transportation Board they had some divided votes. And I think we need to be moving in a different direction. We need to be saying to ourselves that we should be getting supermajorities on all of our policies. That is the right way for us to move forward as a region. And when we have significant differences of opinion showing up here, I would say that we haven't done the good work coming to this point. And that is why I am going to ask for a no vote. I think the process by which we developed the Regional Centers Framework Update did not serve our region or this body well. And at this point, I believe we should send it back and get some more work done on it so we can work through this stuff. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Claudia?
Quick question for staff, please.
Yes.
What is the effect on the regional centers framework if this recommendation fails?
I think we would be looking for direction from the executive board on what you want us to do
Just
next.
technically, not what happens next. What is the state of affairs at the moment it fails, not process, substance?
I
think it would be status quo in terms of we have policies in place, we have adopted designation procedures for new centers. It would be a status quo, I think, of where
So
we're
the
at today.
centers would remain the way they are?
Yes.
Would there be any statement of recognition for the military installations?
No.
Okay, so basically,
the-
everything
the
just sticks with default until and unless we direct further action?
Correct.
Thank
And
you.
the Vision 2050 process would continue, and you would be able to provide any direction you see fit during that update process.
Thank you.
Cassie?
So I'm going to respectfully disagree with Executive Donmeyer. We're not going to have consensus in this group, and that's okay. It is okay for us to have differing opinions. We're representing a very diverse cross-section of this region. We have to have our hats on for the regions that we're here representing, and I think we're having that rich discussion. I think it's very important that we pass a regional framework, and I don't think it's realistic to expect consensus, but I think that when we are discussing these things, we're moving forward towards a more unified direction, and I've voted yes and no on a few things with people, and I voted yes and no on a few things with different people. So I think that what we are seeing us moving towards a unified voice, and that diversity of opinion is important, but it doesn't mean that we're not getting closer to the same page. So I would urge us to pass this.
Barb?
I'm going to echo Mayor Franklin just a minute, and I too respectfully disagree with you, Executive. This has been a process that's been in place since 2015. There have been multiple committees and places of input. I've been on some of them. Our staffs have been on some of them. I think there's been a lot of discussion around a very complex issue. And I know in our small little city, planning is never done. It's not a static type of activity. It's a dynamic type of activity, particularly as our region changes. And so I think things that maybe weren't recognized in this regional framework study have been committed to being addressed in the update to Vision 2050, and I think that is absolutely on target, as it should be. This isn't going to solve all our problems in the region, but not passing it is also not going to solve any problems in the region. So I urge my colleagues to let this move forward and continue to work with Vision 2050 on things that people didn't see eye to eye on in this.
John?
I'd urge a yes vote as well. I think that much progress has been made. Not everybody got what they wanted. But I think this does provide much better direction toward Vision 2050 than going back to where we were before. And I don't know that any more direction would be forthcoming. So I would urge a yes vote on this. I think all counties have advanced under this proposal. And I was struck by the number of different votes from different jurisdictions today, including the King County, where we had some votes on Mr. Roberts' motion, in which 2 King County cities disagreed with that. So I think this does bring the best thought in the region. It brings our best advice, and I think it moves the region forward toward a very successful future.
All right, any further discussion? So we're back to the main motion. All right, we'll take a roll call.
King County. Aye. Seattle. Aye. Bellevue.
Aye.
Kent. Aye. Kirkland. Aye. Renton.
Aye.
Other cities and towns in King County. Kitsap County?
No.
Bremerton?
No.
Other cities and towns in Kitsap County?
Yes.
Pierce County?
No.
Tacoma?
No.
Other cities and towns in Pierce County?
No.
Snohomish County?
Aye.
Yes.
Everett?
Yes.
Other cities and towns in Snohomish County?
Yes.
Port of Seattle? Port of Tacoma? Washington State Department of Transportation?
Yes.
Washington State Transportation Commission? Passes 76% in favor.
76% in favor, the motion passes. So, Josh?
Thank you for everybody's patience and attention and work this morning. So if it works for our president, we can bring back action on the budget and work program at the next meeting.
Okay.
And in terms of the discussion item 9, so just a couple things. Number one, the summary of public comments, that was reviewed with the Transportation Policy Board earlier this month. We were essentially going to share the same information that we shared with the Transportation Policy Board. If it's okay with the Executive Board, we can send out an email so that you all know exactly where those comments are. We'll be bringing back for action the Regional Transportation Plan to the Executive Board after action by the TPP. Does that work for you, Mr. President?
That works for me.
Okay.
Does it work for everybody else? All right. So with that, anything else for the good of the order? No. We are adjourned.